Home is where you are safe. It is the most fundamental assumption most people make about their lives. The door locks. The lights go off. The world outside stays outside. In the residential neighborhoods of northern Seoul, Nowon-gu, Yungnam, families made that assumption every night. Between 2004 and 2006, they were wrong. He came at night. While families slept, while children were in their beds, while front doors were locked and windows were closed, he found a way in. Nam-gyu killed 13 people and injured 57 others across a 2-year campaign of nighttime attacks that made an entire city afraid to sleep. He did not have a motive that investigators could clearly define. He did not know his victims. He simply came in the night, and he did what he came to do, and he left. And then he came again. The first confirmed attack attributed to Nam-gyu occurred in January 2004. A family in Nowon-gu, a densely populated residential district in the northern part of Seoul, was attacked in their home in the early hours of the morning. The attack was sudden, violent, and without apparent motive. The perpetrator entered the apartment, attacked the occupants with a bladed weapon, and left before anyone in the building had time to respond. Investigators logged it as a violent home invasion. They had no suspect. They had no clear motive. In the taxonomy of violent crime, it was filed as an isolated incident. It was not isolated. Over the following 2 years, similar attacks occurred across the northern residential districts of Seoul, Nowon, Dobong, and Jungnam. The pattern that emerged was consistent in its methodology and deeply inconsistent with anything investigators had encountered before. Jong entered homes at night, almost always between midnight and 4 a.m., the hours when sleep is deepest and reaction time is slowest. He targeted apartments and houses where the physical security was minimal. Windows left slightly open in summer, doors with older locks, ground floor units accessible from alleyways. He moved through residential areas on foot, identifying targets opportunistically rather than through any apparent advanced surveillance. He attacked whoever was present: men, women, elderly residents, children. The selection was not demographic, it was spatial. Whoever was in the space he entered was a target. The weapons he used were bladed instruments, knives, cleavers, tools, carried to the scene and used with a ferocity that forensic investigators described as disproportionate to any conceivable instrumental goal. This was not robbery. Nothing of value was taken. This was not targeted violence against specific individuals. The victims were strangers. Between 2004 and 2006, 13 people died. 57 more were injured, some severely with wounds that resulted in permanent disability. The attacks occurred across dozens of separate incidents. Each time he disappeared back into the night. The effect on the communities where the attacks occurred was documented extensively in Korean media coverage from the period. Residents of Nowon, Dobong, and Jungnam described a transformation in the texture of daily life that went beyond the installation of extra locks and the purchase of security cameras. It was a psychological transformation, the erosion of the assumption that home meant safety. Parents began sleeping in shifts. Families moved children into central rooms away from windows. Elderly residents who had lived alone for decades accepted relocation to relatives' homes rather than spend another night in their own apartments. Hardware stores in the affected districts reported dramatic increases in sales of door reinforcement products, window locks, and interior security cameras. The streets of these neighborhoods, which had been ordinary residential areas where people walked dogs late at night and convenience store visits at 2 a.m., were unremarkable, became places that people moved through quickly and with attention. Sleep itself became a source of anxiety, because sleep was when he came. The investigation into the Northern Seoul attacks was one of the most resource-intensive in the city's recent history. Seoul Metropolitan Police deployed significant personnel to the affected districts. Patrol presence in Nowon, Dobong, and Jungnang was increased substantially. CCTV footage from cameras across the affected areas was reviewed systematically. Residents were interviewed. Tip lines received thousands of calls. The fundamental challenge of the investigation was the same challenge that had plagued the Hwaseong murders 2 decades earlier, and the Yu Young-chul case 2 years before. A perpetrator with no discernible connection to his victims and no clear motive that could generate a suspect pool. In a conventional homicide investigation, motive is the engine of the case. It generates the question, who had reason to harm this person? That question produces a list. The list is investigated, the investigation narrows. Nam-gyu gave investigators no list. His victims did not know him. He did not know them. The attacks were not the product of a dispute, a relationship, a financial conflict, or any of the frameworks that conventional homicide investigation is built to process. He attacked because he was there and they were there, and that was sufficient. The behavioral analysis unit that had been established after the Yu Young-chul case was deployed. Profilers worked to develop a picture of the perpetrator from the pattern of attacks, the geography, the timing, the methodology, the escalation. Their assessment pointed toward a male perpetrator, likely residing in or highly familiar with the affected districts, operating on foot with no vehicle and with a psychology that combined extreme violence with what appeared to be a complete absence of the emotional engagement, rage, fear, excitement that typically accompanies attacks of this ferocity. The profile was accurate. It was not sufficient to identify him. What identified him was physical evidence. In late 2006, forensic analysis of evidence recovered from attack scenes generated a DNA profile that was matched against the national database. The match pointed to Nam-gyu, a man in his 30s with a prior criminal record who lived in the affected district. He was arrested in December 2006. He had been living and attacking within walking distance of the police station that had been coordinating the investigation. Nam-gyu was 35 years old at the time of his arrest. He had been born in Seoul. He had a history of mental illness that predated the attacks, diagnoses that were documented in medical records and that had resulted in periods of institutional treatment. He had a prior criminal record that included violent offenses. He was in the profile that emerged from post-arrest investigation, a man who had fallen through every gap that the systems around him had available. The mental health system, the criminal justice system, the social welfare system, each had encountered him. None had retained him in a way that might have interrupted what followed. In interviews following his arrest, Jung provided accounts of the attacks that investigators described as detailed and effectless, precise about methodology, without apparent emotional engagement with the human reality of what he had done. He confirmed the attacks. He provided information that led investigators to additional evidence. He expressed no remorse that investigators found credible. He said in one interview that he had not thought about the people. He he had thought about the entering. The legal proceedings against nam-gyu moved through the South Korean court system over the following 2 years. The central question at trial was not whether he had committed the attacks. The forensic evidence was comprehensive, and his own admissions had confirmed the essential facts. The question was the nature of his legal culpability, and specifically, whether his documented history of mental illness constituted a mitigating factor that affected the degree of his criminal responsibility under Korean law. The psychiatric evaluations conducted following his arrest were extensive. The findings acknowledged the history of mental illness and the periods of institutional treatment that had preceded the attacks. They also concluded that Jong had understood the nature of his actions, that he had known what he was doing, had planned the entry into homes with sufficient deliberateness to constitute premeditation, and had been capable of concealing his activities from those around him over a 2-year period. The court accepted the prosecution's argument that the scale and duration of the attacks, combined with the evidence of deliberate methodology, supported the most serious charges available. nam-gyu was convicted of 13 counts of murder and sentenced to death in 2008. The sentence was upheld on appeal. In 2009, the sentence was carried out. He was executed by hanging at Seoul Detention Center on December 7, 2009. He was 38 years old. The execution was not publicly announced in advance, in accordance with standard South Korean practice for capital punishment. The families of victims were notified after the fact. Some described it as closure. Others said closure was not the right word for something that could not give back what had been taken. What the nam-gyu case revealed, and what Korean mental health advocates and criminal justice researchers documented extensively in the years that followed, was the specific sequence of system failures that had allowed a man with a documented history of violent behavior and psychiatric illness to remain in the community without the level of monitoring or intervention that his history indicated was necessary. He had been treated. He had been released. He had been monitored intermittently in ways that proved insufficient. The systems that had contact with him had not communicated with each other effectively enough to produce a coordinated response to the risk he represented. This is not a failure unique to South Korea. It is a failure that appears in some form in the background of almost every case of this kind in every country where it has occurred. The question of how to balance the rights of individuals with mental illness against the safety of the communities they live in has no clean answer. The systems that attempt to manage that balance will always be imperfect. They will always have gaps. nam-gyu found his way through those gaps. 13 families paid the cost of it. The neighborhoods of Nowon, Dobong, and Jungnang have continued. The apartment buildings where the attacks occurred are still occupied. The streets where nam-gyu walked in the early hours of the morning are still walked by people who moved in after the arrests, by people who were there and chose to stay, by children who were too young during the attacks to understand what the extra locks on the windows meant, and who understand now. The CCTV infrastructure of northern Seoul expanded dramatically in the years following the case. Motion-sensitive lighting became standard in residential alleyways and building entrances. Building management associations across the affected districts formalized the security arrangements that residents had improvised during the attack years. The physical environment changed. the psychological environment changed more slowly. Residents who were interviewed in the years following Jung's execution described a particular quality of residual fear that did not dissolve with his death. The way that a period of genuine danger once experienced rewrites the assumptions that preceded it in ways that are not easily rewritten back. Home as safety is an assumption that, once broken, requires active reconstruction. Some of them said they still check the windows before they sleep. Some of them said they always will. The 57 people who survived the attacks carried injuries, physical and otherwise, that the legal proceedings did not address, and the execution did not resolve. The compensation frameworks available to victims of violent crime in South Korea at the time were limited. Some received support. Many did not receive what they needed. The 13 people who died were killed in the places where they should have been safest. They were killed while they slept, or while they tried to sleep, or while they woke to something that should not have been there. They were killed in their homes. There is no version of that sentence that becomes easier with time.